Hello, and welcome to this episode of the At Sea Podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts, and here is your co-host, Dan Portnoy. Hi, Dan.
Hello.
We are going to wrap up this section of the season, this kind of fun romp, as it were, through the book Sacred Strides, recapping and digging back into each chapter, as it were, and finding the pieces between the pieces. Appropriate timing. I'm releasing another book in September. It's tied to Sacred Strides, actually. I don't know. You and I probably haven't talked about this in public, Dan.
No.
There was a whole, I think I was going to call it appendix. And then I had the appendix removed. So sorry.
Wow.
It's a routine surgery nowadays.
Yeah.
I had written all these poems for this book, and I was going to include them in the book, and then at the last minute-ish, had them pulled, and I thought I would do something else with them, and finally am going to do something else with them. And I feel actually really good about that decision. So another book coming out in September. It's time to wrap this thing up. So we're going to do this last chapter here, and then talk about the what we're doing next for the podcast. Is the plan.
Sounds good. As we continue our gallivant.
We're gallivanting.
Yes. So I guess the big thing is that now, since we're almost recapping a recap.
True.
So we're going a level down in the inception. So here we are at chapter 13, rerouting the race, or Sabbath as an act of resistance. So if we, I feel like I'm supposed to go, meanwhile, like this supposed to be, Aquaman makes a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's going to be a great sandwich. So just bringing everybody back, we've been talking about Sabbath, how it fits into us. There's been a huge amount of running references through the whole piece. A lot of failing on a lot of stories of how things are not going well, or my ideas of things and how they're supposed to be, and now it didn't work so well. There was a turning point just a few chapters ago, and it seems like we're now hitting your stride, if I may. That's terrible.
All the jokes that are pretty much right there in that vein.
Just yes. Oh, already people are like, I don't know if I can do this. Their finger is just inches from the button. Like, I don't know. And here we are now in chapter 13, and Sabbath as an act of resistance. So, I don't know where you want to, like, Sabbath is I think it's such a hard thing. I struggle with it. I just really struggle with it. I think a lot of people struggle with it, but I don't know a lot of people that do it well. I'm kind of jealous of the people who are like, and then I throw my phone away for 24 hours, and I'm like, wow, that is impressive. And they like go full Amish for like 24 hours. It's just like, it's impressive to me.
You can't go, but no, you should never go full Amish.
No, full Amish. All of a sudden I have a beard, there's a hat, I'm making a pie and a chair. So now we're full into, it's funny because I don't have a highlight in my notes even until several pages into, like, we
into this chapter.
And it starts on page 90, but my first note is actually on 92. So
right.
I think it's the quote that I've got highlighted is, I don't think God is exhausted by the energy and focus it takes to create dogs and cats on the same day without pet drama. Instead, I think part of what makes this moment sacred is that God, in joy and deep satisfaction with the work of creation, chooses to rest. And I think that's the intentionality is what got me there, of just the actual, like, deciding. Yeah. Which is always the hardest, because I feel like as soon as you decide, the emergency is just on the other side of that decision.
Very true. Yeah, so this is where ontological thought and kind of a philosophical background is helpful here. That one of the reasons one of the reasons we practice things, and I've talked about this a bit on the podcast, is it seems like almost anything we do that is honestly beneficial for us ends up being difficult to pull off. Pressfield gets into this. We've talked about this on the podcast as well. That he's like, listen, if you want to go off and like do stuff that's like kind of dumb, like no one's going to stop you really outside of the law from developing like a heroin addiction or doing something that's not great. But if you commit yourself to doing anything that is positive and, you know, gets you in better shape or, you know, does something good for the world insofar as like, you know, creating artwork, etc., like resistance will come for you. It will show up and keep you from doing something positive. This is the chapter that that hits that. The part of what's happening there is that I'm designed to live a certain way. My understanding is I'm designed to live a certain way, and the shape of my life, if I live the way I'm designed to, is the shape of God. It's a God-shaped life, and that's not a religious thing. It just has to do with like the normal human patterns in me, which include rest. Like I have to rest. Meanwhile, I'm surrounded by systems that quite literally are conspiring against me being human. Systems that like they'll try to get me to not sleep as well. They'll try to disconnect me from from good and forgiving and kind friends. They'll try to like, it's not just that it's hard to rest because I'm kind of, you know, I'm just quirky and I just have a hard time. It's that I'm quite literally surrounded by systems that are wanting to undo me so that I would be dependent upon them and they could sell me the crap they're trying to sell me. So Sabbath as an act of resistance as a whole chapter is rooted in this ontological notion that I'm designed to live a certain way, and I live in a series of systems that are trying to actually hurt me, and that they're well funded and they don't have my best interest in mind. It's one of the pieces, you know, you could write a whole book on this. In fact, Walter Brueggemann does, and I get into that in the chapter. We'll come back to it in a second. But that's where that quote goes, is, you know, from there, I'm not just trying to pull this thing off because I'm trying to get healthy. I'm trying to live the way I'm supposed to live. And there are elements and agencies in the world that are honestly not wanting me to.
Yeah, it's such a strange thing to. So you're saying it's like an elevated version of yourself to take the Sabbath.
Yeah, in a sense. I mean, I think it's the most natural version of myself. Like it's kind of like in like folks who get into an exercise routine, and after a while, like at first it's hard, and you know, getting to the gym and finding the thing, and your body hurts all night, and then the whole 9 yards. And then when like once the routine actually sets in, people will say things like, I just feel more like myself. And it seems like I've implemented like some practice that is unnatural to me. And it's not that it's unnatural. Like the body wants to move around and lift stuff. What's going on is these unnatural systems that are trying to get me to be more sedentary, or try to get me to like eat crap and like deal with that level 2 or level 3 like headache, like kind of body aches, or you know, garbage every day. I'm so used to those systems that feels natural. So when we practice Sabbath and we pull ourselves, when we pull ourselves away from those systems, and then 2, when we actually make rest an intentional practice, we kind of re-engage ourselves on the level at which we were designed to live, and we feel like, oh, that's what feels that actually feels like me. That is a kind of better version of myself. It doesn't feel like me at first, because the me I've gotten used to, this is, you know, spiritual formation talk, is kind of the false self, and the false self has been informed by systems that really want me to stay my false self, stay hidden, and stay dependent and codependent. The Sabbath tends to break those systems break my dependency on the systems by keeping me separated from them, at least regularly.
Yeah. Now, when you talk about Walter Brueggemann and his book, where are you sticking with just one book, or is it over several?
It's honestly called Sabbath as an Act of Resistance is the name of the book. He's written a
Oh,
bunch.
snap, you snagged it for this chapter.
I hella did, but he's never going to see this.
He's like,
Brueggemann's not out there, man.
Disturbance.
I don't get from
McRoberts.
maybe he might have that kind of thing going on, but I don't. Walter Brueggemann does not strike me as the kind of person who's like scouring the internet for people who have ripped him off. Like you know what I mean?
As an author, if that's where you're living, it's not a good place.
It's not a good place. Also, if you're like if you're an Old Testament theologian, like, you know,
can they rip you off? Can they? I mean, we're
yeah,
talking like 6,000 years.
I feel like you're kind of borrowing all of your material.
It's the Cecil B. DeMille's of like, yeah, we're gonna do the 10 Commandments. We've had 2,000 years of promo. All right, let's do this.
This is when I get into the book. In his book, it's actually just called Sabbath as Resistance, and it says, Brueggemann writes, Sabbath is a bodily act of testimony to alternative and resistance to. I'm sorry, Sabbath is a bodily act of testimony to alternative and resistance to pervading values and the assumptions behind those values. Part of what he gets at is there are values that we predicate our life behaviors on, things like comfort, or a certain understanding of wealth or success, and then underneath those values are these narratives. And so he says Sabbath is a bodily act of resistance, not just against the pervading values, like this particular notion of wealth, but also the assumptions and the narratives underneath them. That in order for me to actually resist like the temptations to live into values that are not natural to me, I eventually have to face the narrative underneath those values, because there's a story I've been told I'm living in by these systems. Some of them are religious systems that then make this this set of values make sense. And the only way, he suggests, and I agree, the only way to undo that is to get to that narrative, recognize it as a narrative, and that there are assumptions I'm making about my life that don't have any real grounding, and then try to replace that underpinning story. It's a brilliant book. So he goes on and says, one of the pervading values, this is me kind of reinterpreting his book, one of the pervading values Dr. King and Malcolm X set themselves against was utility. The thing that made Black Lives Matter differently, and in fact less, is that from the mid-1500s to the mid-1800s, African women and men were the engine of a new American economy. Black bodies were useful for labor. The assumption behind that value, the value that paved the way for the transatlantic slave trade, was that as long as the dominant populace benefited from that economy, the impact it had on human lives was worth it. And that's a lie. So, in other words, the example works for me insofar as, like, no one's going to be like, slavery, it's great, But the assumptions made underneath those actions were really the driver. And the assumption was that if it's working and the dominant populace is benefiting, then whatever it takes to get there is what it takes to get there. That the highest value was the building of a new world. The highest value was the development of a new economy. This is the story. And recognizing that in that context helps me to pay attention really clearly to the fact that I make that exact same trade when I trade in my health and my well-being for like whatever the bottom line is that I'm being sold, which is to say that the act of resistance I engage in as a Sabbath keeper is I'm participating in the same resistance that abolitionists have been engaging in, which is saying that the human value can't be predicated on you can't do the whole end justifies the means thing with human lives. Like, human value can't be predicated on what this body produces. It has to be intrinsic value. That's what Sabbath does, is it resists the narratives that would steal intrinsic value from human life, which roots it in the same tradition as Dr. King and Malcolm X and Wilberforce and all the abolitionists.
And I think that search for meaning, that's how our stories are used. That's what I think is wild. We just have to get to what's that story that we're being told right now, because people will die for that story situation, like how it impacts, like, because that's me being a good dad, that's me defending my family, that's me, like whatever is the underpinning of that story, and how it's so important to
Yes.
especially in light of new information. I think that's the big thing, is like the resistance to the old story, I guess, is the big thing of just saying, I'm not doing that anymore. I want to try to take a step out and do something better with myself, for myself.
Yeah.
And Sabbath does that. Now the scary part is the initial, like you said, because the problem is right after the decision, right?
Yes.
And that's when all of a sudden someone's like, I have free tickets to Disneyland on this exact date that you said that you were gonna just chill out and not do anything. So did you want to throw that away? And I do. So
Yep.
it's unbelievable. I think it's funny that you, of course, link it to football here, which is really funny. I don't
Kind
know.
of.
Does everyone know that you are as big a Raider fan as you are? I don't.
If you've been around for a minute, you know that I was pretty into the Raiders. Maybe more recently, in the last few years, I've honestly stopped caring.
Well, it's kind of been a tough go. I mean, if you are a Raiders fan, you've basically been sent out. If you've seen the show Silo, you've been sent out to clean. That's really what's happened. Like, are you a fan of the Raiders? Too bad, we don't care about you as much anymore.
It's a bit like that. The Oakland version. Well, the story here from the book is an Oakland Raiders story. It's kind of more a mom story, so we'll make it about my mom. When I put a slide up recently, I was told part of this story, and I think the title of the slide was my sweet mom and the stupid Raiders, is I think what I said. Is the name of the story. That's what that'd be the subheading in this chapter for the story. So I was a big fat Oakland Raiders fan at the time for a number of years, and a lot of it was a family tradition thing. So, and Dan, you know this, like. My parents, when they moved to the Bay Area in the 60s, they got Raiders season tickets, and it was like the thing that they did that was like their big expense. They didn't have a lot of money, but they got Raiders tickets. And then when I got older, they would take me to games. They left for Los Angeles. They came back. We got season tickets. It was like a full-blown family tradition. My mom missed a grand total, I believe, of 2 games in the entirety of her being a season ticket holder from 1965 all the way through. So it's kind of a big deal. So when we lost my dad, I shifted into a different kind of posture with regards to how important the thing was, and so I would sacrifice gigs or the gig opportunities to make sure that I was home for games. Then I was very fortunate to be signed on to a booking agency. And for folks who are unfamiliar, a booking agency basically works like a travel agent in reverse for musicians. They book you into onto tours, or they book you into, they do all the kind of the sluggish work, or all the slog work to get artists and musicians on tours and at gigs, and then they take a percentage. So a booking agency makes their money. If you say yes to a gig, the more gigs you do at a higher rate, the better money the agency makes. I wasn't killing it by any stretch of the I was associated with a bunch of people who were. So I was brought onto this booking agency, and one of the first things I did in meetings was like, okay, cool, this is exciting. Looking forward to this. Here are 8 weekends this fall that I'm not available. And they were like, the hell is this?
And just for the record, though, everybody books way more in the fall than they do in the spring.
Especially for folks who are doing what I was doing, which is like a lot of what I was doing was tied to college campuses.
Right, fall tour
and college
is everything.
Fall tour is huge.
Yeah.
So here are these 8 dates. And I think it went it might have gone. I don't remember all the timeline. I think we did it for like 2 years that way, maybe 1 year. Doesn't matter. They were not like stoked about it, but they're like, okay, just like whatever. I think they figured that I would
Relent.
fold. Yes.
Yeah.
But instead, what happened was that the Raiders inexplicably, ridiculously, made the playoffs. It'll never happen again, but it did. And because you don't know that you're going to make the playoffs until deeper in the season, like we had gigs on the calendar already for those Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
And I called up and I was like, I can't do that gig.
You did, for real.
Because I was like, hey, sup? How's it going? How'd you sleep? And and they're like, I'm not gonna make the I'm not gonna make the show you booked for me.
2 months ago, 3 months ago.
And they're like,
Yeah,
oh, nice. That's it. We're done. So they dropped me. Duh.
Surprise.
Yeah, shocking. Why? I felt like this was working out.
Man.
So I got dropped. And I tell that story for two reasons. One, and there's a back part of it that I'll get into in a second. One is that when we live healthily and wholly, including Sabbath keeping, we disappoint people. And we upset systems that need us unhealthy. So if the system needs you unhealthy and you do something healthy, it will punish you. And this is why it's a resistance. It's why Brueggemann wrote the book. It's why I included this chapter. It's not the pathway towards spiritual and mental health is not smooth. And part of why it's not smooth is because the world around you will punch you in the throat if you try to get well and whole. And knowing that going in is way more helpful and more appropriate than thinking that somehow like it's all on you and it's about your own. It's just about your sheer will and everything you're up against is just internal. A lot of what you're up against is internal, but there's a lot around you that doesn't want you well. And so, I'm trying to care for and be present to my mom who's living without her husband. And what the system was saying is like, that's not what we need from you. We need you to be more productive. So it cost me a partnership. It cost me a business partnership to do. And that will be the case for a lot of us when we push back against those systems in Sabbath keeping or health patterns. We will be punished by the systems that want us unhealthy. So I tagged the story with this, that on that day we played the Jets on that in that playoff game and smoked the Jets. It was a great game. The Raiders played an amazing game. Rich Gannon was near perfect. So it was great that we won. But before we got into the stadium, we walked in, and normally, and Oakland sports culture, and you know this somewhat, Dan. Like Oakland sports culture was very unique, and really interesting and vibrant. Like folks who come into like A's games or Raider games and like show up in the parking lot. If the game's at 1, there are people trying to get into the parking lot at 7
a.m.
in the morning.
Yeah.
People would spend the night, partying the night before, and breakfast, lunch, dinner in the parking lot, like do a whole thing. There's a group of guys that had parking spots close to us that came in as a whole Tongan family, and they would come in with these pigs.
Oh yeah, full pig roast.
Pigs on sticks, like on the front of the work truck, and they would build a fire pit in the parking lot and roast pigs on the whatever the spittoon or whatever the thing is.
Mm-hmm.
Vibrant culture, and along with all that, there was usually music, usually live music, some DJs. So it was just well on this particular Sunday, maybe it was a Saturday, don't remember, but we played the Jets, and within I'm probably like an hour or so of being in the parking lot, we heard, my mom and my buddy Mike and I, we heard this really great cover from across the parking lot of Ride the Lightning, the old Metallica song. We're like, that's a really good cover. we'd heard cover bands before. Usually a cover band. People play Metallica. They're kind of a big, Raider associated band. They're from the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And they're Raider fans.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a few of them are. Well, the more we listened, I was like, that's an insanely good cover. Like, that's a really great cover. That tone is spot on. And Mike Bowles, dear friend, who was with me at the time, he's like 6'6", so he could see over the crowd. He looked over and he went, "Oh my gosh!" He grabbed me like a toddler and lifted me up, put me on his shoulder, like no joke, like picked me up like this and just set me on just picked me up and put me on his shoulders, and took my mom by the wrist and started running across the parking lot because it wasn't a cover band; it was actually Metallica.
Oh, this is that story. Holy crap!
Metallica had driven into the parking lot on a flatbed truck, dropped the walls of the truck, and played like a 45 to 60 minute just impromptu set on a whim. And the way I read it, I don't like to spiritualize things, but the way I read it,
this is the confirmation.
This was divine. This is like a little divine snack. It's a little like hey, I heard you got fired. I brought a casserole called Metallica. Like that's what
from
this
Jesus
was.
To James Hetfield.
That's what this chapter should have been called. From Jesus to James Hetfield. And it was then and still is now like one of these just incredible moments and memories, friends and family, my mom and I specifically, which is to say, and this is the final cap on this chapter in this section, is that yes, I have to resist things in me that are difficult to resist in order to live a more God-shaped life, which is the one I'm supposed to live. Like I'll disappoint systems internally, and I will feel punished by it in the same way that I feel certain kinds of tension if I start going to the gym, if I haven't been going to the gym. Like it's not easy to do, and the road is hard. The road is also hard because there literally are systems that will punish you for doing the right thing. I mean, that's just been true forever about all kinds of things. There are systems in the world that will punish you for doing the right thing and trying to get healthy. And on the other side of those resistances, there are gifts and joys available that we just won't. One, you can't predict, you can't plan for, and you can't work directly for them because that's how the divine economy works. Like on the other side of faith and sacrifice, there are riches and deep rewards that like you can't really begin to imagine. Obviously the parallel there is like I couldn't have imagined Metallica in the parking lot. It was my little divine reward. But the fruits and the benefits of Sabbath practice specifically in your life, I couldn't even begin to tell you what's available for you on the other side of that. I can promise you that there are riches on the other side of all the disappointment and all the resistance and all the sacrifice it takes to actually live this more divinely shaped life in Sabbath keeping. Those things are there. They will show up, but you have to push through that resistance piece first.
Right, and that's coming no matter what.
That is coming no matter what.
Yeah,
and that's his chapter.
I still remember that seeing those pictures from that week, and I was like, Metallica played the parking lot.
Dude, it was
like
amazing.
It was that. Wow, I didn't know you were there. That's hilarious. Well, as far as the book, and then wrapping up kind of the final piece here of like, because I think that is a key ingredient. It's like is once you make something good, people are coming to attack it, and by people I mean anything.
Yep.
It could be a system. It could be just a circumstance, and it's gonna come at you. Going, are you sure? Every time. Are you sure you want to do that?
Yeah.
So then I think it's fun. You talk about smartphones. You talk about family struggle or dealing with young kids, which are, oh my gosh, talk about systems of tyranny. And just how do we put a dot or a pin on the end of this book on what we're supposed to come away with?
Well, I'll say one more thing in that direction about we joke around, and I know you're joking, but like kids and like having a family, specifically having kids and having to have we, how should I say this? We joke about you just cracked the joke about the systems of tyranny or whatever with kids. Kids take a lot of time, and energy. And parents will do this all the time, and I've done it, where it's like kids are really, really hard and they're a joy, and both things end up being true.
Yes.
One of the things that continues to contextualize parenthood in, I mean, I know you're joking about tyranny, but as like kind of an eye rolling, oh my God, labor, oh my kids. One of the reasons like kids and parenthood like end up in this kind of category of like something I've got to do and I can't wait to get the kids out of the house, and or like, hey, a week just the two of us. Oh my gosh, a week without the kids. Like one of the reasons we end up like categorizing our kids in this like obstacle to peace place has very little to do with kids at all, and very little to do with parenting at all. It has to do with all of the energy and the demands on my time and attention that these other systems and these other expectations have placed on me. I'm freaking exhausted because so much else in my life is demanding so much. And then when I'm at the house, I'm in my house right now. And then when like it's time to be dad, I'm depleted. That's not about my kids. That's not about my parenthood. That's about how much time and energy I'm putting in to systems and programs and ideologies that aren't me being a dad. Now, none of that's bad, but I don't want a good thing in my life to live in a place labeled resentment. One of the things a Sabbath can do is it can reframe what it looks like for us to enjoy the better fruits and the better parts of our life. If you're a parent, you want to enjoy your kids. In other words, if you're a parent, you don't want it to just be a matter of like, this is just some shit I got to do until they're 18. And then like, I hope I did a good job. I get to launch them. And then maybe we get to be friends later on. Like no one wants to live there. Not really.
That sounds terrible. I mean, I don't think a lot of people want to live that way. They do.
They do. And
they do.
And one of the way, if we're serious about valuing our families above all these things, which like most American people will say that.
Sure. It's a good story.
It's a good story, specifically Christians. Then I've got to actually put a system in place to treat that relationship with with some degree of sacredness and specialness. And the Sabbath can be a day on which, and I do this with my kids right now. I've got my son for another 4 years in the house. Probably he's smart. He'll probably like want to go do something. Maybe go to college. Who knows? On the Sabbath day, if he wants time with me, that's what I'm doing. And I don't have another place to be, right? Like I have my Sabbath plan. I've got stuff I'm interested in doing. But if my kids are like, "Hey, Dad, will you?" The answer is yes on the Sabbath day. Like I am available to my kids because there will come a time when they won't be available to me at all.
Right.
And the Sabbath day reframes the relationship I have with my kids. In order for that to be the case, I have had to push back on systems and ideologies that are stealing my times, on the stealing my energy, so that on that Sabbath day when I'm available to my kids, I can be more like actually fully present. So that's one more aspect one more way to talk about the resistance piece. Like I don't want to be so damn depleted that I can't enjoy the primary relationships in my life.
Right, because I think that whole priority thing is, we'd say family's the priority, but in practice, usually it's family gets whatever's left over.
Yes.
And that's
and there are definitely seasons, and you and I've talked about this. There are seasons we got onto this like early chapters. There's seasons in life for sure to be grinding. Absolutely, without question. But the overall shape of my life has to include margin, has to include space, has to include resistance against things that will constantly keep me moving, so that these deeper wells in life, like being a dad, are actually full and not just present. Like, while I'm also a dad, we can't live that way. Not long term.
Anything else that you want to kind of put a pin in?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'll do is like I'm gonna read this kind of epilogue piece here as a way to wrap up this little experiment of ours, and then say thanks to these wonderful folks who've gone along this journey with us. This is the epilogue from the book, and it's literally just called Epilogue, because I've seen other more successful authors use that word. And the actual title is A Short Visit with Frog and Toad. You've probably had that experience in which, because your mind is already in a pattern of thinking about something, you notice connections to it everywhere. That happened the other night. As I was putting the finishing touches on this book. My daughter, who was 5 at the time of this writing, had selected a pair of stories for me to read as she fell asleep. And one of them was Arnold Lobel's classic children's book, Frog and Toad Together. From that book, she had chosen to read a story called The Garden. The story goes like this. Toad notices Frog's beautiful garden and asks how he too can have a garden. Frog, in all his generosity, hands Toad some seeds. Good Lord. Can you hear that?
I just think it's hilarious that it's like, and now I would like to have the most serious moment of this.
Wow. I think.
Amazing.
Here's what I think. I think I'm bugged. I think
Straight to the landscaper. He's like,
I think this is what I think is going on. They talk about resistance. I think I'm bugged. I think there is surveillance equipment in my damn garage, and that as soon as I pull this thing out, the minute I pull this thing out, someone gets a phone call, and they're like,
stand
hey,
by, stand by,
Ted,
stand by, go.
Ted, you ready to go? In 3, 2, 1, fire it up.
Just launch.
Good Lord. It's every time.
Really?
I tried to turn in an audiobook one time, and you're like, do you hear all of them? I'm like, yes, I do. I hear them. The story, The Garden, goes like this. Toad notices Frog's beautiful garden and asks how he too can have a beautiful garden. Frog, in all his generosity, hands Toad some of the seeds that he was using and tells him that once he plants those seeds, he will have a garden quite soon. Toad immediately runs home and plants those seeds, and just as immediately he starts yelling at those seeds to sprout and grow, and predictably, they don't. Frog comes running in response to Toad's yelling and tells him that he has to leave the seeds alone or he'll frighten them. But Toad is so anxious to see growth and newness that he just can't leave well enough alone. So, contrary to the advice of his friend Frog, Toad puts in copious amounts of time doing the opposite, choosing instead to work very hard in a number of ways to get those seeds to grow. He reads to them by candlelight, and they don't grow. He sings to them, they don't grow. He reads them poetry, they don't grow. No matter what he does or how he performs, Toad simply cannot manage to get those seeds to grow. He does, though, manage to wear himself out entirely. So he falls asleep. When he is awoken by his friend Frog, he looks around on the ground to find that, as promised, those seeds have sprouted and have begun to break ground. At last, shouted Toad. My seeds have stopped being afraid to grow. And now you will have a nice garden too, said Frog. Yes, said Toad, but you were right. It was very hard work. That's pretty much how I started my particular journey towards belovedness. I was committed to growth and newness, and I spent most of my energy performing in every way I could in order to make those good things happen. And while that desire in me to work well and effectively was a good one, I had desperately misread the invitation. You and I were, quote-unquote, handed these seeds and invited into a process that would provide a loving home for our whole lives, including our strengths and talents. We were not invited to share in it because, like good instruments for the machine, our strengths and talents are necessary for growth and newness. We have been invited in love so that we can freely and joyfully share in all that goodness. Having misunderstood that invitation, I'd worn myself out and fallen asleep. Thankfully, I too was awakened by the voice of a friend. And that voice said this: wake up and see what's already growing. That's how I made this all to work. And I want you to join me in it. No, I don't want you to stop singing or reading or playing or writing. I want you working while knowing that your work is a way to share in this life with me. I also want you to know that when you don't work, either because you can't or because you happily choose not to, you share in this life with me. May the growth and newness in your own soul, as well as the growth and newness in the soil you work on, be an expression and an outpouring of who you are in and with me. You are beloved. May it be so that this book and the stories that make it up serve as a way for you to hear the voice of God telling you the most fundamental truth about your story and mine. You are mine. I love you, and I'm proud of you. Fiend.
Fiend.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, well, we're going to do a few things. One, I will probably be doing some stuff here on the podcast off and on, talking about the new book that I'm putting out in the process. We'll have some conversations about that as time goes on. The book comes out on September 9th. So just a hop, skip, and a jump away. In the meantime, what we're going to be doing with this podcast is I regularly enough will engage like a little Q&A on Instagram, usually on Tuesdays, so today. And what I'm going to start doing is harvesting a few of those questions and then building these podcast episodes around things that y'all, the listeners, are actually interested in knowing, things that like you're wrestling with, things. And usually the Q&A is in the direction of art and religion and leadership. And so we'll be tackling those things between Dan and I here at the podcast. A lot of that stuff with regards to like art and faith will have some parallels with regards to the new book. But we're going to reorient this podcast to start answering some of the questions that are bringing people to the yard, as it were. And the reasons the people, I think for the most part, have been paying attention to what I'm doing other places and being more helpful in the ways that I'm already being helpful. That is the plan with the podcast. How's that sound to you?
Sounds good to me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys for joining us on this episode of the At Sea podcast. If you would like to be part of the podcast moving forward, you can visit me at Instagram.com/Justin McRoberts. And on Tuesdays or whatever days they pop up, hit me with a question. Is there something you want to talk about? Something you want to hear some reflection on? You want to get kind of some extra eyes on? Hit me with a question over Instagram, and we'll probably make it part of the podcast at some point. Until next time.